this chapter, the first topic is, why do organisms reproduce? What if this organism will not reproduce? If this organism will not reproduce, then next generation won't come. That means the species, this generation of particular species will be the last ones to survive on this earth, right? Because at some point they are going to die, and after these organisms, there are no more organisms to survive on this land, right? So these organisms need to reproduce to make survivability of the species, right? To make the survivability of this species. So that's why for continuing of species, for existence of species, these organisms reproduce. Do organisms create exact copy of themselves? For some organisms, yes, and for some organisms, partially. Yes, some organisms do copy themselves exactly. How? They undergo asexual reproduction, and when they undergo asexual reproduction, they are giving off their DNA, or they are providing their DNA molecule to the next generation, right? So here in asexual reproduction, only one parent is involved in reproduction. So this parent will give off its all DNA or provide its all genetic material to the next generation, right? Means again, obviously it will have its own DNA, but it will produce copy of the DNA, and this copy of DNA will go to the next generation, and both this copy, the parental copy and the daughter copy, will be the same. Obviously they will be identical to each other, and that is how they are undergoing asexual reproduction, where this daughter cells or daughter organisms are exactly identical to the mother organisms, understood? Or the genetic material between the two organisms of different generations are exactly identical. Now what is genetic material? Genetic material is nothing but DNA molecule. Now this DNA molecule is actually giving off some characteristics to us, like color of iris, skin pigmentation, if I'm going to bald or not, understood? So these are the characteristics which are depending on DNA molecule, genetic material, and this genetic material are inherited from one generation to other generation, understood? In asexual reproduction, the next offsprings which are produced by parent are exactly having same kind of DNA molecule, understood? That means exactly same type of genetic material. So this offsprings can be called as natural clone of its parents, understood? So this kind of reproduction is asexual reproduction, right? If we talk about asexual reproduction, where DNA copies are partially identical to their parents, in that case, here sexual reproduction is occurring between two parents, right? And these two parents undergoing sexual reproduction to produce an offspring, which is actually an individual of next generation, right? So what they are doing, they are producing gametes, and these two gametes get fused with each other to produce zygote, and zygote is unicellular organism. And this organism, it is the first stage, it is single-celled organism, and this zygote will undergo cellular division several times to produce a full-fledged organism, right? Like us, in our cells also, first we develop as zygote, and this zygote undergo many times cell division, and by this cell divisions we get produced in full-fledged organism, understood? But obviously this division is in such a way that the parents having its own DNA and offspring is having their own DNA. So what is happening here is the individual that is produced from sexual reproduction is having 50% of its paternal DNA, means DNA from father's genetic material, and 50% of DNA will be of maternal DNA. Maternal DNA means it is having 50% DNA identical to mother's DNA, right? So here genetic material is 50% identical to father and 50% identical to mother. So this is how in sexual reproduction an individual comes with mixing of two different individuals. That means mixing of genetic material from two different individuals, and that is also in 50-50 proportions, right? And this sexual reproduction leads to production of variation. Means here variation comes. Whatever character father have, whatever character mother have, these two characters get mixed with each other. Now some of the characters of mother are not there in father, and some of the characters of father are not there in mother, but now this individual which have produced due to sexual reproduction is having both the characters. Some of them are from father and some of them is from mother. For example, I have two ships, one sheep is having white fur and let's say long tail. There is no such kind of thing, right? But let's say that that sheep is having long tail, and another sheep is there which is having black fur and short tail, right? Now these two sheep can undergo sexual reproduction, and an offspring will produce through this sexual reproduction can have black colored fur from mother sheep, which is having long tail, and long tail which is there in the paternal sheep, right? Father sheep. Understood? So here a new kind of variant is produced. Here we find a variation in which is not exactly similar to parent, I mean exactly similar to mother. Neither it is exactly similar to mother nor from his or her father. Understood? So this kind of thing leads to production of variation. Understood? Again, in unicellular organism, when cell divides to form two cells, this DNA get copied. Understood? DNA or genetic material get copied inside the cell, and when this cell divides, the DNA molecule with or genetic material with cell apparatus get divided. Understood? It's not just DNA molecule gets separated, or copy of DNA gets separated from the maternal DNA copy, and it will reproduce on its own. But what occurring is here, the two DNA molecule, one which is copied and one which is maternal DNA or which is already there in mother cell, this two DNA with their own cellular apparatus divides from mother cell, and one mother cell will lead to produce two daughter cells. So one mother cell divide itself to produce two daughter cells. This is how DNA in unicellular organism gets separated, right? And in multicellular organism, during formation of gametes, again cellular division is occurring, right? In which only half of the chromosome is given off in the gametic cell, right? So sperm cell from father cell is having just half of the chromosome or half of the genetic material or half of the DNA molecule which is there in the paternal DNA, right? Or paternal genetic material, right? So in sperm there are only half of the genetic material, and ovum which is produced in mother is also having half of mother's genetic material, and when these two get combined with each other, half plus half 1. Understood? So half genetic material from father and half genetic material from mother, and these two combine to form a full genetic material which is required for an individual to develop. Understood? So this is how new individual have DNA of both the parents, and in asexual reproduction, DNA provided to the offspring is fully of mother cell, is totally or completely identical to mother cell. Understood? Importance of variation. Now, why variation is important? Why variation is required? Every living organism have occupied its own niche in an ecosystem. Let's say a deer. Deer in an ecosystem is consuming phototrophic organism, parts of phototrophic organisms. That is, it is getting food from phototrophic organisms, plants, grasses, leaves of taller plants or herbs, shrubs, right? Whereas this deer get prey of carnivores, become prey of carnivores. Understood? So this deer is actually have taken an ecological role in ecosystem. That's what we call as niche, right? Niche is nothing but ecological role in its ecosystem, right? Now, due to any condition like increase in temperature or scarcity of water, that is drought or flood or fall of meteorite, if this deer get extincted from this place, then what about carnivores? Then what about controlling population of grasses and plants, right? All this get disturbed. In short, ecosystem get disturbed in here, right? Which can lead to destruction or devastation in several trophic levels, right? Carnivores and those organisms eating these carnivores. Understood? So all this will get disturbed. So in this deer, there should be some organisms which can survive in adverse conditions like higher temperature or low scarcity of water. Some of them should be able to survive in flood condition or in some etc. Right? There are many adverse conditions, right? Many type of adverse condition, right? So some of them should be able to survive them, right? If all of them are identical to each other, if no variation is there, then what happened if any adverse condition will arrive in such population, and this condition is not good for those kind of organism, that this organism will be completely wiped out from that ecosystem, right, which will lead to a huge destruction in that ecosystem. But if these organisms have variation, then some of them will survive, and this ecosystem would be able to get replenished after a certain period of time, right? For example, some deer are able to tolerate higher temperature, right? So in a large population of deer, maybe there may be many deers that would get die. Let's say a group of 100 deer is there, from that 70 deer would get died, but still 30% deer have not died, because they are the variants which can tolerate higher temperatures, and they can carry out for the next generation. After a certain period of time, this population of 100 deers can get replenished in an ecosystem, right? But if they get completely wiped out, understood, then then replenishment of ecosystem is not possible. So yes, this ecosystem must have different organisms having variations in each kind of population to make them survive, to replenish the environment if any adverse condition is arriving. In our book, an example of bacteria is given, that suppose a bacteria is there which can survive in temperate forest. Temperate forest means which is having a colder environment, that is, here temperature is lower. But if this organism, if this bacteria comes in higher temperature, then what? If some of these bacterial cells are resistant to higher temperatures, then this species can be able to survive. Understood? I'm talking about species, not an individual. Understood? Then some of the bacteria will survive, and those bacteria will thrive ahead. Understood? Most of the bacteria obviously will get die, but only some bacteria which can survive in higher temperature, which are variant that can survive in higher temperature, they will survive, and most of them get die. Understood? Means most of those which does not have this kind of adaptation will get die. Understood? So variations are required. It is not necessarily that adverse condition arrived is of higher temperature only. It can be any other adverse condition, right? So all type of variants should be available in a population to replenish ecosystem if an adverse condition is arriving. Understood? And adverse condition can arrive at any time due to soil erosion, due to global warming, or it can be any reason. Understood? So variations are very, very important for a species to survive. Now let's study about mode of reproduction by single parent. Obviously, mode of reproduction which can be done by single parent is called asexual reproduction. All of this reproduction is belong to asexual reproduction, right? So first we'll study about asexual reproduction in lower organisms which are unicellular, or if they are multicellular, they don't have tissue organization, or if they have tissue organization, very poor type of tissue organization is there. Understood? Or they don't have organ level of organization or organ system of organization. Organ level of organization means having organ in the body. Understood? So this we are talking about those organisms who don't have organs in their body. Understood? So let's talk about first unicellular organism, and in unicellular organism the most common type of division is fission type of division. Understood? Let's say amoeba. Amoeba is having irregular shape. So what is occurring in this amoeba? Binary fission is occurring in this amoeba, and this binary fission is very similar to the cell division, wherein first copy of DNA is been prepared in here, and then nucleus will start to divide, and to each nucleus same amount of genetic material is distributed. Then whole cytoplasm, then again surrounding this nucleus there are cytoplasm, right? From this mother cell having two nuclei, these two nuclei will separate from each other, sharing equal amount of cytoplasm, and from our mother cell, that is from one mother cell, there will be formation of two daughter cells, right? So one mother cell will divide to form two mother cells. This kind of division is called binary fission. Understood? Again, binary fission can be found out in many different unicellular organisms as well, like leishmania, which is causing kala azar. It is having whip-like organelle which is called flagella, and it is undergoing division in vertical axis, right? This leishmania is undergoing binary fission through vertical axis, as it is having a particular shape, and through vertical axis it is dividing. Amoeba does not have any regular shape, so there cannot be any axis. We cannot address any axis in amoeba, right? But to Leishmania, yes, it is dividing. Here binary fission is occurring on vertical axis. Understood? In many protists, this kind of binary fission can be found. Understood? And in adverse condition, when unfavorable situation is there, these organisms cannot undergo binary fission. Then this organism undergo multiple fission, wherein these cells are forming cysts around them, right? This cyst is a very highly protective layer, which is protecting these cells from adverse condition or unfavorable situation, right? And in this cell, within the cyst, nucleus will undergo division many times and producing many nuclei. And when favorable condition is arriving, when this unfavorable condition or adverse condition is completed, they are finished, this is finished, then what happens is this cyst is removed, and nuclei present within this cyst in this cell, all this nuclei will come out with a small part of cytoplasm, and all cells and all this nuclei with smaller cytoplasm will become a whole cell. That means they are now an individual. They are now an individual. Understood? So that is how this multiple fission is occurring when adverse condition or unfavorable situation is there. Understood? Or normally these organisms undergo binary fission. Next one is fragmentation, wherein organisms like Spirogyra divide themselves, right? These organisms are multicell organisms, and these organisms divide themselves into many parts, and each of these parts will divide into a whole new organism. So this is just like a bone. This is remind me of God killing demons, and demons parts of demon body are falling apart, and each part get developed into a whole new individual life, right? It seems like some satanic boon, right, to these organisms. Understood? So this is how these organisms reproduce, right? And this process is called fragmentation, wherein these organisms fragment their body into different parts, and each fragmented part develop into a whole new individual. Next is regeneration. In regeneration, what happens? These organisms accidentally fall apart in different parts, and again all these parts develop into a whole new individual, right? Fragmentation can be found in those organisms which does not have tissues, which just have identical cells throughout the body. Understood? So all cells are identical, and these cells are able to produce their own kind of cells, right? So yes, this organism can undergo fragmentation, but in regeneration process, it is not similar to the fragmentation, because in this organism there are primitive type of organs, right? They don't have well developed organs. They have tissue and they have primitive type of organ, and luckily they are undergoing this kind of processes, right? If they get accidentally they get fall apart into 2 or more parts, each part get developed into a whole organism. For example, this can be found in planaria, right? This can be found in starfish as well. Next is budding. Budding can be found in hydra. What these organisms are doing is, this hydra are having a life in which they are fixed to the substratum, right? They are having sedentary life. That means fixed to the substratum. Now in this organism, what is happening is that from their body an external outgrowth is developing, right? And from this outgrowth a new individual is developing, which is exactly identical to the parent body. Understood? And this outgrowth which are developing into a new individual, which has not developed yet but which is developing into a new individual, is gradually growing, and then it will detach from its parent body and get fixed in the substratum, right? And now this individual is whole new individual. It is developed into a whole new organism, right? And this kind of reproduction is called budding, where from parental body a lateral outgrowth is arising, right? And outgrowth is arising from which a new individual will develop. Understood? This kind of reproduction, this kind of asexual reproduction is called budding. Understood? Next is vegetative propagation. Vegetative propagation can be found in plants, in higher plants more specifically. Due to this vegetative propagation, a new plant is arising from an older one, that is from parental plant, a new individual is developing, right? And here this is asexual kind of reproduction, so here only one parent is required, no other parent is required. And for this kind of reproduction, vegetative propagules are produced in plant, and from this vegetative propagules a whole new plant is developing, right? For example, plants like bamboo, sugarcane, from stem nodes a new plant can arise. From banana plant also, from rhizome of banana plant a new plant is arising, right? So this kind of method is called vegetative propagation. In vegetative propagation there are some natural methods and there are some artificial methods as well, like we are doing stem cutting or layering or grafting in plants like sugarcane, rose, grapes, etc. Understood? In mangoes, etc. So this plant, in this way we are producing plants, new plant individual by vegetative propagation. And in vegetative propagation we have certain advantages. These advantages are we can have new plants, or we can have new generation of plants which are exactly identical to their parents, right? If I like characters of certain plant, right? For example, a banana plant is producing more amount of banana, more numbers of banana. Now I want to have this kind of banana plant in the next generation as well, right? So what I will do, I'll do vegetative propagation of this banana plant, and in the next generation whatever individuals I will be having from this banana plant, all those banana plant will have same kind of banana quantity of bananas, right? Same kind of yield as of mother banana plant. Understood? So in this way we can have new individuals exactly identical to their parents. Next one is, we don't have to wait for longer period for maturity of plant to undergo sexual reproduction, right? For sexual reproduction flowering is required, and for this flowering a maturity time span is required, which is really a long time in some plants. Understood? So to avoid this longer time we can go for vegetative propagation. We are also having some plants which are seedless, like banana. We are having bananas, seedless banana. We are having seedless grapes, right? We don't have to depend on seeds for these plants, and we can use vegetative propagules or method called vegetative propagation for these plants, and we can produce many more individuals of such kind of plants. Understood? So these are the advantages which are prevailing with the vegetative propagation. In bryophyllum plant, we can see that from leaf margins or notches of leaf margins, new adventitious bud is growing. From this bud a whole new plant will arise, and when this small plant fall from the leaf and will fall on ground, root will develop and go and penetrate inside the soil, right? Growth of root will penetrate the soil and whole new plant individual will develop from there. Understood? So that is how in bryophyllum plant, right, vegetative propagation is occurring. Understood? Now next is spore formation. Sometimes we see on bread that there is some cottony mass grown over rotting bread or rotting food, right? Now this rotting structures doesn't have any spores, right? But this rotting structures or this cottony like mass, which is called hyphae, are having blob on a stick structure, right? Means these are actually this mycelium or this hyphae is growing horizontally, and from this horizontally network structure which is having a lot of fibers in them, from this vertical structures are growing, which are and on top of this structure a blob like structure is there which is called sporangia, and in this sporangia spores are producing. These spores are covered by subchemicals which are making the spores protective from certain adverse conditions. They can be chemical or they can be higher temperature, right? And these spores can disperse with the wind and can fall on soil or on another food, right, which is rotting, and can grow new hyphae over there, right? So this hyphae or mycelium is of fungus, obviously. So fungus can reproduce by spore formation. Understood? In this way. So all this kind of reproduction that we have studied yet, like spore formation, vegetative propagation, binary fission, multiple fission, all these are type of asexual reproduction wherein only one parent is required, so your genetic material is exactly identical to their parent cell.